should people be allowed to fly flags from lampposts? 0207 862 2222 is the number that you need. Now, we're asking this because the Shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick, has joined the movement of people attaching flags to lampposts. Now, he went on X saying, "Raise the colours. While Britain-hating councils take down our flags, we raise them up. We must be one country under the Union flag." Now, several councils have been accused of taking down St George's Cross flags in recent days, but the government's rules do say that if you are putting flags up on highway land, like lampposts, then you need to have the permission of the owner of the site. In this case, it's the Highway Authority. Tessa, where do you stand on this?
Is Robert Jenrick really the Shadow Justice Secretary, or is he trying to become a sort of right-wing influencer?
You'd have to ask him that.
I'm just really interested in his behaviour recently. You know, he's sort of gone to camps with cameras and he's all over the socials.
Following Fair Dodgers and the Tube.
Yeah.
He is, but look, politicians are taking to social media. They know that actually they can tell their own story, tell their own narrative without having to come on shows like this or be grilled by journalists and in media. So, yeah, but is there something wrong with that?
Well, I think the problem is that the public debate, particularly the social media discourse, has become so polarised. One of the ways you scramble to get traction is by going to the far fringes of your political limit. And I would suggest that's what Robert Jenrick's doing. The thing about flags, funnily enough, I was talking to someone from Northern Ireland the other day who seemed very reasonable. And I said, "Oh, you know, are you political? Who do you vote for?" And he said, I vote for a non-flag party. I was like, "Really, in Northern Ireland?" He went, "Yeah, I voted Green last time." And I think there is something about the flag, while I'm all for it in sports grounds, 100%, tie it around your neck, go for it. And actually, ceremony and military occasions, I think there's a real case for the use of the flag. But I think that particularly, and he says the British flag, the Union Jack, but most of these, let's face it, are George crosses. And I'm all for the patrons.
Not all of them, but
a lot,
there's
a
a
huge
mixture.
number,
Okay.
a huge number. And I just would suggest that somebody with the St George's Cross tied around his neck, running, for instance, towards the cenotaph, has not perhaps got a wholly patriotic and united vision of Britain when he or she is doing that.
But people putting them up in their local area, off street lamps.
Is it a welcoming flag? Is that saying hi, welcome?
But your thoughts on people putting them up in street lamps by the road? Are you okay with that?
My thought is, what is their motivation at this point?
Okay. All right. Christo?
When you say, is that a welcoming flag, what do you mean? I mean, of course, because if you live here and you live in this country, then what's not welcoming about the flag?
I think perhaps you're being slightly disingenuous there. I think that sometimes, and that particularly became associated with the fringe element of football fandom that was hooliganism, the St George's flag. And I think we have seen it recently hijacked, wrongly, I agree, sometimes by the far right, and their messaging isn't wholly inclusive.
But in order to therefore then take it away from those people, people who just want to fly it should be allowed to. And I think you're flirting. I think you're on a tightrope with some of your words about Robert Jenrick, that he's sort of on the far fringes. I mean, that's
of his political.
Yeah, but then again, you're sort of. I hate this implication. I loathe the implication that if you want to, and I know that you're not expressly saying this, but if you want to fly a flag on a lamppost, right, a Union flag or a St George's Cross, right, that perhaps you're far right.
But here's the difference, because there is a conversation to be had whether or not the flag has certain connotations or not, rightly or wrongly. But that's not what we're talking about here. No one is saying that if you want to put a flag on your car, a flag on your window, a flag in your garden, a flag on your roof, that anyone has any issues with that. You're perfectly allowed to do so. In fact, Keir Starmer, when he was asked about the flag, says, great, it's a patriotic thing to do, go ahead and do it. What we're talking about here is putting it on public property. So I live in an area and I like flags, and I'm going to say I'm going to put Union Jacks on every lamppost down my street. Should I be allowed to do that? That's the question.
Well, OK, firstly, Keir Starmer, bad example. He was the one that stood there on St George's Day and started talking about the far right when he was surrounded by St George's flags. Again, not a great example. But I tell you why people should be allowed to do that.
OK.
And that's because I think that there are places where Palestinian flags, whether you are a supporter of Palestinian, what's going on
You're talking
there
about
or
Tower
not,
Hamlets.
Tower Hamlets,
Yep.
and I think in Birmingham as well, where they were allowed to stay on lampposts. And the perception is, and we'll go back to what we were talking about people and British identity, the perception is that if you are British and want to fly a flag, that it's taken down. If you are not British and you want to fly a flag, it isn't taken down.
Okay.
And that's the issue
That's
as to
a
why so
perception
many...
issue.
No, it's happened in Tower Hamlets.
Let's find out what people are saying at home. Stephen's in Cheshire. Stephen, welcome to the show. Good morning. How do you feel about this? Should people be allowed to stick on flags, whichever flag it is, on any lamppost in their council?
Yeah, first of all, good morning to you all. I think the issue here really is not necessarily about whether they should go on lampposts. There's a practicality that councils have to address in terms of it's the old sort of health and safety issue and things like that, people going up ladders. There's lots of things attached to that. So I can kind of understand that. But the reality of what's taking place is not necessarily whether they should go on lampposts. You're seeing a huge expression right across the country of protest, of identity, national identity expression, because in reality, this current government, who likes to blame the previous government, and likewise, they both do it, they both have blamed the previous government for decades and decades. The public no longer buy into that. And the reality is, these two political parties have let the British people down for decades, and that's now what's being expressed. It is a kickback against the system which is failing to protect history, heritage, tradition and culture of the indigenous peoples of these lands. And that's the problem. What we will see, which I think is a risk, which nobody wants to see, is a very tolerant and welcoming country turn away from that. That is the risk, because we are seeing, and people feel threatened now across the country, whether people like to hear this or not, that is reality.
Threatened by whom?
The logistics of people coming into this country in the numbers they are is unsustainable. And it's as simple as that. We cannot cope with what's going on.
Stephen,
and this is an expression...
I'm so sorry, I've got to say something. Look, I feel like, Tessa, and I adore you, but I feel like you're huffing and puffing that someone making that point is actually putting fuel on the fire of this, because it's people who have made that point that sort of get that kind of reaction, I think, that makes people even more frustrated.
But it's interesting how we're having this whole flag discussion at the same time and in the same breath that somebody says he feels potentially threatened by the arrival of asylum seekers. So I'm therefore suggesting that those flags, when they're being waved, are not entirely welcoming. That was the broader point.
He didn't say asylum seekers. He said immigration, but he made a point about national identity, and this isn't actually about flags on lampposts.
Why is our national identity being flown in the face of a group of vulnerable, illegal, term them how you will, arrivals, which are hogging the headlines?
They're being put on lampposts on high streets.
OK, pause there, because I want to hear from Andrew. Richard, thank you for kicking us off. Andrew's in London. Good morning, Andrew. What would you like to say?
Good morning, yeah. First of all, I'd like to address the matter properly from a person of colour.
Yeah.
The whole idea that, you know, when you talk about British people, my parents came here from Nigeria in the 50s and they're past now. It's an embarrassment. It's shameful. The way this flag has been hijacked. When we had the 1977 Queen's Silver Jubilee, people were proud of the flag. But this flag has been hijacked by the pound shop, Enoch Powell's, like Robert Jenrick, who were devising division between the communities. This is not the problem. The problem is, and people keep saying Labour not doing this. Give them a chance. You're in government for 5 years. Give them a chance to sort this situation out, which is serious. But trust me, it's happening around the world. And we cannot go for these dog whistling of putting one community against another. We don't do that here.
Yeah.
What is going on?
Well said. Brilliant.
I think what's going on is that some people are worried about national identity being lost, about, and I'm not going to say asylum seekers, but about when it comes to the numbers of people that come here, the infrastructure we have to support them, and the idea that for years those people who have made those kinds of points have been like deemed as racist or xenophobic. And I'm worried it's boiling over. Okay. And I agree the flag should be taken by people who just have national pride. My worry is it's becoming something far worse.
All right. Thank you. Andrew, thank you. Thank you all for your calls on this.